What can you tell about Iraq looking at it from offshore? Not much. This is Qasr, Iraq's only significant port, and from the coalition's point of view, it's about the most secure place there is in Iraq right now. Secure enough that the first civilian aid officials from the U.S. government have been arriving here to begin the work of rebuilding Iraq. The thinking is that putting Iraq back together again in a hurry, starting with the absolute basics like getting the water running again, will go a long way toward convincing the Iraqis that the U.S. is a force for good, not just invaders, conquerors of their land, that this war actually made life better here, and that it makes sense to work with America rather than against it. It will be interesting to see how the Iraqis respond when that day comes, because right now, figuring out what they think about all this, watching them, talking to them, it's almost as though you're still offshore someplace. So much of what they tell you is confusing or contradictory or just doesn't make sense, at least to outsiders, which is what the United States is in this country. It's also what I and my team of Nightline colleagues are in this country. And as a result, when the question is, what's going on in the hearts and minds of the Iraqi people? The answer is, it's very hard to tell. It sounds like it should be easy enough. Just go ask them. Well, we have been. And the obstacles to getting at what they think of this war begin, absurd as it may sound, with the kids. Unfailingly, whenever our crew members get out of their car and take out their gear, they are surrounded, besieged, swamped by kids. And these are not laid-back little children. They push, they shout, they beg for things. This gesture means water. They also want cigarettes. And when you tell them you don't have cigarettes, they don't go away. They get in your way. There is no real conversation to be had here. Then their older brothers show up. With the older brothers and their dads and uncles, the conversation is also a series of demands, not for stuff, but for information. What's America doing here? Are you trying to steal our oil? Why did you take over our country? An awkward journalistic moment, because you do feel a need to answer them, and as you patiently explain how President Bush says the U.S. will leave Iraq and leave it better off, you realize you've become Ari Fleischer's stand-in in southern Iraq. You also realize that your statement of U.S. policy is totally news to most of these people, and some of them genuinely seem relieved to hear it. Driving around this part of the country, it hits you again how little people here have. They will scavenge anything. One of the things they do not have is any glimpse of the outside world that is different from what the Ba'ath Party allowed them to see. What were they told about us? That we are oppressors, killers of Arabs, supporters of their archenemy Israel. The civilian casualties in this war so far only feed that impression. No wonder when that first shipment of Kuwaiti food aid came in under U.S. escort a week ago, they chanted that chant of love for Sadam. They were standing up to the enemy. They were holding their heads up high. However, an Iraqi I spoke with about this afterward told me he thinks they chanted that way because they were actually happy to get the aid, but that was the only way these young people had ever been taught to celebrate. Frankly, I'm not so sure about that explanation, and that's the thing. As in other totalitarian states I've covered, Russia, Romania, and so on, I think the reason that things sometimes don't make sense is because people actually do talk nonsense when that is safer than speaking the truth, and nonsense then has a way of taking over, and rumor, and paranoia, and God knows that's the way it's been here in Iraq. That picture from the first day of the invasion, the young man flailing at Saddam's face with a shoe, there's a follow-up to that story. Only a rumor, but it has spread all over among Iraqis that 12 hours after this aired on television in the West, Ba'ath Party thugs murdered that man and his family. It's just a rumor. We have not confirmed it, but this is one of those cases where what matters is that people believe it. Death, people take for granted, is the penalty for saying the wrong thing. At one of the food handouts where a young man was criticizing the disorderly way people were taking the food, I asked him, "Why is your face covered?" Because, he said, "I don't want the Iraqi government to see me. We do not believe the Iraqi government is gone." I have met people who have said far more controversial things, that they want Saddam Hussein gone for good, that would be liberation. And when I heard those words, they had the ring of truth. But you won't see those people's faces in this report because they were too frightened to be taped. And even if they were willing, we decided not to put anyone in that position. But I've met them, a very few. And yet the same people also express strong doubts about the United States. Being against Saddam does not automatically make an Iraqi a friend of the USA. Here at the port of Qasr, the U.S. and British have been urging local Iraqis to come back to work. The problem is, and this also has the ring of truth to it, they don't trust the U.S., and the soldiers working on the ground here understand why not.
There is a fear that we will leave before the Ba'ath regime is in fact crushed and before they are safe.
Because it's happened before.
Because it's happened before, precisely.
That legacy, that memory is still coming back to haunt them and us.
Absolutely.
But soldiers must do unpleasant things when there is a war on. This is a British checkpoint. Iraqis here were furious that foreigners were telling them where they can or cannot go. Here, yet another Iraqi who did not want to be taped said to me, "Mr. Newsman, tell this to America. If this is freedom, we don't want it." That's how it is reporting this story of hearts and minds in Iraq. Some people are for the war, some against, some for real reasons, some for reasons we think they're making up. A few impressions, all of which are subject to revision. Chris?
And John, Donvan joined